Online Voices and the 616 Company presents The Book of the Unguided, Canto III by Darren William Pearce, based on an original story by Richard Sjunnesson, narrated by Behr. Act 1. Seth. I was 4 years old when my father made the ultimate sacrifice to save me and ensure that I would live to see another day. It was the heaviest of burdens, which I cursed with all my heart. I ask you, dear reader, to hear me out. Every single day I wished for a different outcome. Every single day I wanted this event to be undone. It changed a lot of things for me, though, and for that, perhaps I should be grateful. My father was a beloved ruler with remarkable achievements. I was nothing compared to him and to what he had accomplished. In fact, because his deeds eclipsed me, they always made me feel tiny compared to him. I was but a meritless boy with a destiny that would eventually put me on the throne. One that many believed I did not deserve. I was not my parents to them. They saw me as an insignificant love child. I was a mistake made by two legendary behemoths who had a taste for saving the world over and over again. So I rose to the near impossible task of ruler at the age of 18. It was a mammoth undertaking for me, made more so by the fact that I did not have the undying love or trust of the people of Zion. As soon as my dear father was in the ground, my mother, Eve, put all the blame on herself and froze me out. She rejected me coldly and kept away from me as much as she could. My uncle interceded as my caretaker and raised me as best he could. He taught me what I needed to know for the most part. I was tutored by many of the court and its advisors. Even the captain was fairly supportive, though I have a feeling this was done out of duty more than love. I was quickly taught the old histories, which accounted what a titan my father was. I was also taught about the energies and the mysteries of the world and how I might control them. But for every lesson, my father was the shadow that grew ever larger, like a dark ink stain across my life. I began to feel that with each new deed, each heroic undertaking, and each magnificent story, my own part and power was like a candle to a roaring bonfire. I was 4 years old when I saw my father's funeral. It was a strange affair, and in a way it served as a monumental ceremony to further cement just how amazing the man was in life. The procession's route was a complex one. It was designed to celebrate my father, offering him one last grand adventure before he sailed off into the afterlife, or wherever heroes like him go. It was all very strange. It meant to visit key points in his regency where certain rites and rituals would be performed to honor and prepare the man for his final journey. I did not fully comprehend this, but it apparently was a tradition in Zion, and I would not stand in the way of a people in which I needed to gain love and acceptance from. I was involved in the procession, as was my uncle, his two trusted advisors, my mother, the captain, and a bunch of other citizens who were chosen due to their various accomplishments and undying loyalty to the throne. The final and main guest of honor was none other than my father's body, which would be taken from the city of Zion. His body would then travel around the outskirts of Hell Frost, and then straight back to the place of my birth, where my parents lived the happiest times of their vast lives. I found it strange to return there. especially after such a heartbreaking, trying, and emotional journey of my young life. I have to admit that I barely remember it. It was decided that this is where they would lay him to rest. His body would forever reside with all that he knew and loved, save for me and my mother, who lived on. The service was trying and upsetting, especially for one so young. It was hard to remember anything at 4 years of age. Once it was over, I was taken back to Zion. Zion, which was my home now, was a city held in a grip of sorrow and depression soon after my father's death. I am told and remember that the city lost many lives in the Battle Royale to Adam's brutal harvest of souls. We came out of it with great losses, but we emerged victorious and managed to redress the balance in the trade-off of souls between heaven's angels and mortal folk. And yes, the elixir of life was added to the list of forbidden practices alongside both the engineering and the construction of machines. I was not what the people needed, and they made no effort to hide it. Zion was war-torn. The people were dour and broken. They looked at me with barely any disguised disappointment. As the years took flight and flew on, they stabbed me with words of ridicule. They took issue with my age, my puny-built limbs, and how I was unfit to sit upon the throne. Some asked the question, was I really my father's son? I did not ask for this. I did not want this. I did not need this. It was not my fault that my mother, in blind fury and pure rage, shot me through the heart with the cruelest arrow. My father, the good man that he was, sacrificed himself to save me. He used his power, giving his life for mine, and brought me back from the edge of the abyss, so that I might live, and he might finally find peace. I was not sure if I was worth the trade, but a spark in the back of my mind kindled with a thought. If my father thought me worthy, why can't you? The common people are fickle though, and they love nothing more than to foist their problems onto the shoulders of others. None of them would offer me the support I desperately needed. They could not see what I lost, and they could not see what was taken from me in an instant. No, they were too wrapped up in their own troubles, blinded by their own fear of the future, to care one iota about a young king who was plainly just another victim. How fair was that really? To save the city and to prevent a coup d'etat, my mother was appointed Queen Regent of Zion, in the hopes of calming the fears of the people and to thwart a potential rush for power. She would rule for 14 years and take care of all the politicking in the court until I was of age, an age that would set the heavy crown of the city upon my still young, troubled brow. For me, my coming of age couldn't come fast enough. I hated my childhood. It was a nightmare that just seemed nigh on never ending. My father was dead, and my mother was as far away as she could possibly be. With the way I was treated by her, she might as well also be dead to me, as I was to that woman. My childhood, which should have been filled with friends, happy memories, love and affection, was instead a kaleidoscope of memories, played back flicker frame in my mind. The memories of the Battle Royale, where I was coated with the blood of angels, had left an indelible mark on my soul, my psyche, and my heart. I could not sleep. Every waking moment and every night I replayed those horrific events in my mind, including the ones that led up to my death. Over and over again I relived that nightmare. Over and over I died. Day by day and night by night, I kept on dying. I fell into deep melancholy, gripped by depression and full of anxiety. It did not do my mind much good. It ravaged my every thought and forced me to stay in my chambers away from everything, barely eating, drinking, or sleeping. I was a wreck. Time moved on. My coronation day dawned. My uncle was a grand man. He took the pieces of my father's ancient war crown, the very one that was shattered over 800 years ago when he confronted the betrayer. And from the shards, he forged a new crown for me. I was also given his old shield and a replica of his mighty axe, the Angel Cleaver. It was but a replica, though. It had no power infused within it, and perhaps my uncle did not trust my abilities just yet. Why should he? I was not my father. I could not control that song of power that he once had. But I appreciated why my uncle crafted them. They were meant to inspire and to raise my spirits. But really, all they did was make me feel smaller and smaller in my father's shadow. The crown was ill-fitting. It fit my head perfectly, but it did not fit my mind or my heart. I did not want to wear it, and it felt like I was wearing a cap made of 10 tons of iron. So I would only wear it on very special occasions, finding all sorts of reasons to not bother otherwise. I simply felt unworthy of the legend, the legacy, and especially its might. I was always like this, though. I was always riding on some low or another, unlike children of the city who lived life to the fullest, despite everything. In fact, the only time I had some lust for life would be when I studied with my uncle and his advisors. This is when I came to question many things, myself, of course, and other things from our long and storied history. In the past, the seven, or what was now left of them, my mother, uncle, his advisors, and the captain, were originally created to know only war and destruction. They were to be ruthless enforcers who guarded the seraphim and protected their worlds. They don't remember much from year zero. I can't blame them for that. It was almost 8,000 years ago from now. From time to time, I can salvage some new details from my uncle. Every now and then, he offers more insight, and I am left to try and put all of it in place. In the old tales, especially Canto II, they were used to perform more tasks than just make war. It made me think that the world's imbalance must have come to such a point due to this. The seven were designed to carry out war, not to carry out the other tasks that they were set to do. I found out that they were utilized in every possible task imaginable. But if war was their original purpose, did this world become molded by the seven into a violent and dark place over time because that was their destiny since birth? That was their purview, their blueprint, if you will. You don't send a cook into a battle armed with a spoon. You don't study all your life as an architect just to be thrown onto a blacksmith's anvil. I began to reason these things. I knew that an architect drew plans for buildings and wouldn't have the first clue about how to operate a forge. And even if they managed to somehow make something, it would be inferior to that of the work of a true blacksmith. So I began to ask, is that what happened here to our world? Did the seven do a horrible job with it? And because the world is but one of many to the seraphim, it simply slipped their notice? Or was it because they didn't care? Or were too arrogant to admit that it was just one mistake in a vast ocean of other small, insignificant mistakes that had never caught their attention? I learned of a word, hubris. The more I dug, the more I found that did not quite make sense. I pondered their recruitment into the Seven in the first place. I think it's all a bit vaguely described, really. In Canto I, my uncle describes how they have been here since the first light of the universe filled the void. I personally thought of that as jumping to a conclusion, or writing text for drama's sake. My uncle would not confirm or deny it, of course. He always changed the subject. Now the seraphim, I can see them being there at the dawn of creation. But I think the Seven have only been here since the dawn of creation of this world. I feel they were assigned to it. It made more sense to me that if the seraphim created a world, they would assign another Seven to the planet as guardians, overseers, and protectors. I tried to piece together all of this as much as possible. I figured the seraphim always needed a plan to replenish the Seven's ranks to balance the scales of the cosmos, to satisfy the demand on every world they created. An example of this cycle was my mother, I reasoned. My mother was their buffer plan on our planet, and when she died a human, she was reborn as another child of war. Her destiny to enter the vanguard of the Seven and balance the quota once needed. Not long after my mother's mortal death, the Egyptian sin wars began. Apophis, fueled by thoughts of revenge and hatred for the high heavens, spewed out of his hell nest. He was driven out by their slights and previous treatment of him. Apophis was on the warpath, and his goal was in sight right before him. To counter this, all of the other universes' respective vanguard of the Seven was recalled. They were brought to our world to stand as a battalion and shield to protect it from the masses of Apophis's demon army. One last effort to save us all from impending doom. Apophis, I read, had assembled a mighty horde of demons created to smash all opposition. Of course, his humanoid demons were quite tough, but the ones that caught my ear and my eye were the bigger demons. A master of his art, Apophis created 12-foot-long demonic reptiles, massive beasts with sharp claws and teeth that tore through the ranks of Heaven's battalion like it was rice paper. He was a crafty flesh shaper indeed, and the seraphim had only seen just a fraction of his power when he sat upon the throne in heaven. I remember being shown fragments of these beasts, dug up by archaeologists in Zion. There are some near-complete specimens in the grand halls and museums. I cannot for the life of me imagine fighting one. As for the fate of Apophis, perhaps you'd like to hear that part of the story. I'm sure we have time to slip into this side tale more before we wander back to the purpose of the other. There's not much written about this moment, of course, and I can't blame them, since it's not the proudest moment in the history of heaven. After the Egyptian sin wars, it was decreed that the Seven should aid Anubis in his never-ending fight against Apophis in the underworld. This was clever, and a lie, because at this very time Apophis had already been defeated. So then, what purpose did this serve? Well, heaven was always fond of smoke and mirrors, and people are easier to control if you give them something to fear. Furthermore, if Apophis was still around, heaven would come out looking like the good guys, no matter how many bad decisions they made up there. The mortals had seen Apophis' demon army, and they feared him totally. Apophis' fate was a terrible one in reality. He paid in more blood than I think any of them expected. He was smoked out of his lair and brought to heel, captured by the remaining 8 heavenly soldiers. He was taken to the leader and tortured extensively for each and every victim and for all the crimes he'd committed during his reign and campaign. Then he was taken to a place of execution and brutally killed by quartering. They attached chains to his limbs, to his long serpentine tail, and mounted horses. Then they rode off at the same time in 8 different directions. With a pop and splatter, the demon was torn asunder, and that was not the end. My mother took her glaives and hacked out the demon's eyes. Once they were done with their slaughter, they took the body parts and scattered them all over the Valley of the Damned, which was deep in the bowels of hell. This colored my thinking from now on, if you can bear with me. See, this is what I figured the 7 were masters of: war and the violent arts that came with it. It wasn't the proudest moment in my parents' long history, and reading about it, you can see why. These were the same people who ruled our realm. Were they diplomats? Some of them might appear like that upon the outside, but within burned a flame of fury and bloodlust that was hard to temper or to rein in. I've rambled on long enough about Apophis, but I hope you found it interesting. Now we can go back to the concept of the 7. Forgive me if I seem somewhat disjointed as well. This is a lot to process and a lot to try and explain in the time we have. In any case, there were 616 heavenly soldiers that died in the Sin Wars. All of those 616 soldiers were made up of groups of 7. Each one of those groups were their own planet's vanguard, or crew, if you will. That means there are at least 88 worlds out there that we know next to nothing about. Only that they exist, and to me, that's pretty incredible. However, that aside, only 8 returned from this particular battle. The Seraphim must have been somewhat upset and stressed at the loss of so many, for it was indeed significant. It must have also caused a huge security breach in the many worlds until the numbers were balanced again, but we'll not get into that today. It does make sense, though, for Adam to hold my mother in heaven. They might have needed her off-world to help with other planets. What blew my mind at that point was the realization that my fellow friends, Judgment, Mercy, and the Captain, were not of this world. They were extraterrestrial beings and not made from the building blocks of this planet at all. I pester them now and then, try to get answers, but they are blank on the concept, and they pay me no mind when I do ask. Perhaps they truly don't know. I still think that fact is beyond belief. I digress. What then of the Seraphim's reasoning for the Dark Angels? Our own world has 610 Dark Angels in power, equal to that of the 7, so perhaps that's why the quota of 7 hasn't been refilled since then. These Dark Angels scare me. They appear to be malfunctioning, yet they still remain here. It gives me little comfort, to be honest. Since the Dark Angels are kind of equal to the ranks of the 7, you would have expected the Seraphim to have done something about that to balance the numbers. But they have not done so. It's perplexing. Perhaps the Seraphim have not decided what to do yet about the Dark Angels, and that's why they remain in this kind of stasis. They do fascinate me, though. I had a temple created to use as storage for these creatures until they can be reactivated from their somnambulist state. Each morning, just before I do my other duties, I go to speak to them. I proclaim myself as their rightful ruler and commander. I do this daily, and each day I am always left disappointed. I consider them useless constructs of meat. One day, judgment played a cruel trick. I did my morning ritual in the temple, and I had an answer. My heart froze for a moment and skipped several beats as I heard the dark angel say, "Yes, Master." I could not believe my ears. Had the dark angels finally answered my call? This was too good to be true. As I looked around and prepared to give orders to my awoken army, I heard a sound. It was nefarious for a start. Then it boomed into full-blown laughter as Judgment strolled around from the other side, where he had been hidden, beaming, grinning, and looking insolent. I was not pleased. I did not like being mocked, for these creatures were a mighty army that my father left behind. They were my birthright, and I was their master and commander. One day they would listen to me. One day. I would not give up at all in my goal. In addition, there is no alternative plan when it comes to the protection of Zion. Our fate rests in the hands of this frozen army. I am Seth, by the way. Or that's what you can call me if you don't prefer King. I came to my right on my 18th birthday when my mother sought me out. She finally accepted that I was ready to shoulder the burden of rulership, and then, without a word, left the city alongside Mercy. I could count the words that woman had spoken to me since my father's passing. She never got over the shame, I think, the shame of what she did, and she misses my father more than anyone. This tells me a lot. She is looking for a way back to him, I think. And Mercy, the ever-compassionate follower of our family, might finally have found a way to end her misery. I could guess I knew what that means, but honestly, I'm a young king with an ill-fitting crown, and I still don't feel I'm anywhere near close to be ready to wear that crown, or be called king by the people of Zion. I had some good years before my father's death, and then more years of suffering, 14 to be exact. That nearly broke me. It didn't make me ready to be king. It didn't make me ready for anything.